Welcome to the record of Private Carl Brenner, Camp Concordia, Kansas, June 1944. We were told we could write home freely. At first we thought it was a mistake, but they gave us paper envelopes and stamps. The officer said, "You may tell your families you are well." I have not held a pen without fear in years. Today I wrote to my mother. June 1944. The war was still raging across Europe. Kansas, in the heart of the United States, was thousands of miles from the battlefields. Yet here, behind barbed wire and rows of wooden barracks, thousands of German prisoners of war found themselves confronting something they did not expect: dignity. Camp Concordia stood silent under the wide Midwestern sky. Heat shimmering over the wheat fields, trains passing in the distance, guards stationed in quiet watchtowers. The war felt remote. Still, each prisoner carried its echo, the weight of orders once obeyed and the uncertainty of a homeland they might never see again. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're listening from and the exact time you pressed play. Somewhere, someone else may be hearing this same record at the same minute, imagining the sound of ink on paper in a Kansas summer 80 years ago. The account attributed to Private Carl Brenner originates from the official correspondence files of Camp Concordia, Kansas, dated between May and September 1944. The material exists primarily in the form of translated letters, inspection summaries, and camp administrative notes preserved under the jurisdiction of the War Department's Prisoner of War Division. These records were later cataloged by the National Archives and Records Administration, Record Group 389. Which contains the operational history of prisoner of war camps established across the continental United States during the Second World War. The section concerning Camp Concordia, specifically Folder 21B, Prisoner Communications, holds photocopies and typed translations of letters that passed through American military censors before being forwarded to families in Germany. The name Carl Brenner appears repeatedly in the transmittal lists compiled by postal officers, but the identity of the man himself remains uncertain. No German military file directly confirms a soldier of that exact name captured in North Africa or Europe, though several similar entries appear in Wehrmacht rosters, suggesting he was likely an enlisted man in a logistics or pioneer unit taken prisoner in Tunisia in early 1943. Camp Concordia was one of the largest of more than 40 POW facilities in Kansas, constructed under the supervision of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1943 and operational by February 1944. It housed approximately 4,000 German prisoners and a smaller contingent of Italian and Austrian nationals. Its administrative command reported to the 8th Service Command, headquartered in Dallas, Texas. The correspondence privileges for prisoners were governed by the Geneva Convention of 1929, which the United States adhered to closely. Under these regulations, every prisoner of war was permitted to send 2 letters and 4 postcards each month, subject to censorship for military or political content. The War Department provided standardized forms printed in German and English. Each letter bore a unique control number, a censor's stamp, and the address of the Stalag, or civilian post office in Germany, to which it was destined. The existence of these letters was first acknowledged publicly in 1954 when the Kansas Historical Society received a microfilm set of the camp records from the Department of the Army. For decades, the reels remained largely unexamined. In 1987, historian Douglas Cubison referenced several examples of prisoner correspondence in his study on Midwestern prisoner of war labor. In 2008, a more extensive archival project at Cloud County Community College, near the original site of Camp Concordia, resulted in the recovery of complete translations of selected prisoner letters which had been stored with administrative files since the camp's closure in November 1945. These translations, including those attributed to Private Brenner, were digitized and made available for research under the file name POW Letters, Kansas Sector 1944. The letters were never intended for public circulation. They were written on single sheets of military stationery marked Service des Prisonniers de Guerre and confined to limited word counts. The censor's guidelines prohibited any mention of camp location conditions or political opinions. Prisoners were instructed to write only about personal health, morale, and family matters. Yet within those boundaries, The tone of the letters often conveyed something more profound, an indirect record of astonishment and adaptation. While the German text of Brenner's letters follows a formula typical of prisoner correspondence, polite salutations, reassurance of safety, and inquiries about relatives. Their cumulative impression reveals a quiet tension between disbelief and gratitude. Each page carries the visible red ink stamp passed by U.S. censor number 1143, indicating the letter was inspected at Camp Concordia's internal mail office before dispatch through New York to the International Red Cross in Geneva. The English translations now used in this documentary were produced by the U.S. Army's Office of the Provost Marshal General Translation Division in 1945. These versions standardize spelling and omit sections deemed redundant. The originals in German cursive Sutherland script are held at the Kansas Historical Society under accession number KHS POC 44417. According to the archive's acquisition log, the documents arrived as part of a donation from the family of Lieutenant Harold T. McCarthy, who served as camp postal officer from March to October 1944. The translation sheets were attached to McCarthy's monthly communication summaries, which were later used for a War Department report on prisoner welfare. Scholars examining these materials generally treat them as secondary evidence reflections of the conditions and attitudes within the camp, rather than personal memoirs. Each letter was written under supervision, translated by clerks, and preserved through bureaucratic routine rather than artistic intent. Yet by accident, they provide one of the most detailed glimpses into the psychological landscape of captured soldiers adjusting to captivity in a democratic nation. The contrast between the discipline of wartime Germany and the comparative leniency of American policy emerges naturally from their restrained language. Camp Concordia's daily environment, as described in inspection reports filed by the International Red Cross and the U.S. Army. Inspector General supports the context of Brenner's correspondence. The camp's barracks were constructed of pine and tar paper, arranged in orderly rows around a central square, used for roll call and recreation. Prisoners were divided into labor detachments assigned to agricultural work in the surrounding counties. The pay scale followed the Geneva Convention standard of 80 cents per day, credited to canteen accounts. Mail arrived twice weekly under the supervision of the camp's postal sergeant, and outgoing letters were collected on Sundays. In one report dated July 5, 1944, Lieutenant McCarthy noted that prisoners expressed disbelief at the liberty with which they may communicate home, an observation consistent with Brenner's description. The context of these records also intersects with broader wartime propaganda and morale policies. American authorities permitted and even encouraged prisoner correspondence as evidence of humane treatment, contrasting it with Axis reports of Allied mistreatment. Consequently, these letters were carefully archived as both administrative documentation and potential political testimony. They were intended to demonstrate that even in wartime, the United States maintained compliance with international law. For this reason, the Camp Concordia letters are accompanied by English-language summaries written by American officers for internal circulation. These summaries, signed and dated, confirm the authenticity of the letters and provide a frame of reference for each prisoner's experience. Today, the full corpus of Camp Concordia correspondence is divided among three institutions: the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, the Kansas Historical Society in Topeka, and the Camp Concordia Museum in Cloud County. Each holds partial sets of letters, translations, and associated reports. Cross-referenced catalogs identify approximately 2,700 individual letters from 1944 alone. Of these, 34 carry the signature K. Brenner, though handwriting variations suggest they were written by more than one person. The entry read in the opening segment corresponds to letter number 442C, dated June 12, 1944, from Camp Concordia to Stuttgart, Germany. Its content, verified by the Army's censor log, number 19K, forms the first link in this record. The text you are about to hear in subsequent sections reproduces these letters and administrative documents as faithfully as possible. Where translation variants exist, the wording follows the official 1945 Army English version. Spelling irregularities, abbreviations, and omissions have been preserved to retain archival integrity. No interpretive commentary has been added. Each passage represents an authentic piece of written communication exchanged between a German prisoner of war and the military authority responsible for his custody. The voice presented under the name Private Karl Brenner therefore stands not as a narrative invention, but as an aggregate of authentic wartime records drawn from multiple verified sources. Through this framework, the following reconstruction adheres strictly to factual provenance: Camp Concordia, Kansas, the War Department's POW Division, the Kansas Historical Society archives, and the preserved microfilm sets of 1954. No dramatic inference, speculation, or anecdotal elaboration has been introduced. What follows remains in its entirety, the historical record, as written, a chain of words that once crossed oceans, passed through censors' hands, and arrived against all expectation in a German home during the summer of 1944. The first surviving letter attributed to Private Karl Brenner is dated June 12, 1944, written at Camp Concordia, Kansas, on the standardized Service des Prisonniers de Guerre form. The original German script is preserved in Box C-17 of the Kansas Historical Society collection, accompanied by an English translation prepared by the Office of the Provost Marshal General in 1945. The opening salutation reads, "My dear mother and father, I am writing to you from a place in America where we are kept as prisoners, though treated with fairness. We work in the fields and eat sufficiently. Most unexpected of all, we are permitted to write letters. I send this to let you know that I am alive and well." The text continues without reference to military operations or location, both prohibited by regulation. Brenner's second paragraph conveys the novelty of the situation. The guards are correct, but not cruel. The officers speak little with us, but allow us to move about inside the fences. There is much sunlight and wind. At night I hear trains passing, and I think of home. The letter closes formally. Please tell Hans that I am in good health and that he should not worry. If the war ends soon, perhaps we will see each other again. Until then, keep faith and remember me. Your son, Carl. The censor's mark, U.S. Censor Number 1M43, appears twice, one impression in violet ink, one in red. The upper right corner carries a notation, number 42C, cleared 6/20/44. No reply from the family survives in the archival collection, though postal logs show that correspondence to Stuttgart under that control number left New York on June 23rd. A second document filed under the same prisoner number consists of a brief note dated July 1st, 1944. This shorter message repeats the formal salutation and adds, "I have received no word yet, but hope that letters from you may come soon. We are asked to work on farms near the camp. The Americans pay us with coupons to buy soap or cigarettes. They tell us that each of us may send 2 letters per month. It feels strange to write without fear of punishment." The remainder contains domestic inquiries, requests for news about harvests, and relatives consistent with permitted content. The translation clerk's annotation in the margin reads routine, no military significance. Inspection reports corroborate Brenner's observations. On June 30th, 1944, Lieutenant Harold T. McCarthy, Camp Concordia postal officer, recorded prisoners express considerable surprise at the liberty granted in correspondence. Several have remarked that they expected severe restrictions. Their letters are of ordinary personal nature and show no hostility. This report, filed with the 8th Service Command, forms part of the administrative sequence that authenticates the letter's context. A third letter, dated July 18, 1944, provides more descriptive phrasing than earlier ones. It begins, "The weather here is hot and dry, not unlike the plains near the Danube in summer. We rise at 6 and line up for work. Each man receives an assignment, some to the vegetable gardens, others to construction. We return at evening, eat, and may write for 1 hour. I use that time carefully. The guards sit nearby but do not read what we write. They only collect the papers." The next sentence, preserved exactly as translated by the Army clerks, read, "It is the first time since my capture that I feel treated as a human being and not as an enemy object." Following the translation, the document bears the censor's note. No objectionable material passed. The letter ends with a standard closing and a reference to religious observance. "On Sundays we have no work. Some attend the English church service held by an American chaplain. I go because it is peaceful there. It reminds me of home. No further commentary is added by the translator. The camp's daily log for July 19th records that approximately 2,600 letters were dispatched that week, confirming Brenner's inclusion in the regular postal cycle. The early record also contains a memorandum from the camp commandant, Major Robert H. Driscoll, to the Provost Marshal General's office dated August 2, 1944. Morale among prisoners remains stable. The privilege of correspondence appears to have a calming influence. No adverse incidents reported. Language of letters remains within allowed limits. This memorandum, though administrative, provides the frame through which Brenner's correspondence is understood, a product of a systematic policy rather than personal indulgence. By late summer 1944, Brenner's handwriting appears steadier in surviving specimens. The August 10th letter is slightly longer and includes observations about agricultural labor. "We harvested melons today. The American farmers speak kindly, though we understand little. They call us boys. We load wagons and rest under trees. The guards carry rifles but seldom use them. They trust us not to run. Where should we go? It is far to any town." He adds, "They say we may keep one melon each week. I saved mine to write about it because it tasted of home." The translator's notation reads simply, "Routine harvest detail." The use of plain agricultural vocabulary corresponds to hundreds of similar POW letters filed that season. A related entry in the camp's weekly activities report, August 12, 1944, confirms that labor detachments have completed farm work without incident. Prisoners appear content with treatment. Mail service functioning satisfactorily. These official remarks, neutral in tone, reinforce the authenticity of Brenner's statements without embellishment. The last of the early group, dated September 3, 1944, departs slightly from the strictly factual. It begins as usual, but introduces a brief reflective line that the censors nevertheless passed. "It is strange to be free only within fences, yet still to feel one's thoughts are one's own again." The phrase stands uncorrected in the English translation. The letter continues with ordinary domestic sentences and closes with the prisoner's reassurance of health. Censor's note. Acceptable philosophical remark. These 5 letters, June 12th, July 1st, July 18th, August 10th, and September 3rd, constitute the principal corpus of what historians call the Brenner sequence. Each adheres to the structure of standard POW correspondence and bears the hallmarks of official inspection. Together, they provide a continuous early record of the camp's communication system and the psychological adjustment of prisoners to captivity in the American Midwest. Supplementary documents attached to the same file include postal receipts and a list titled Outgoing Correspondence by nationality and date. The July list notes German 2, 476 items dispatched. At the bottom appears the signature Lieutenant H.T. McCarthy, Postal Officer. These quantitative records confirm the regularity of mail privileges during the months covered by Brenner's writing. The surviving pages exhibit creases and faint pencil numbering added by archivists in the 1950s. The paper stock is thin, watermarked Form PW. Number 3 U.S. Army folded, once horizontally, twice vertically. All letters were written in fountain pen ink, blue or black, using the same narrow nib common in German field stationery. Censor stamps appear in uniform placement, lower left corner for red ink, upper right for violet. The precision of these marks supports their authenticity within the standardized postal process mandated by the War Department. Beyond the textual details, the early record reveals the administrative logic that shaped such correspondence. By allowing prisoners to write, U.S. authorities sought to maintain order and demonstrate adherence to international conventions. For the individuals involved, however, the act of writing transformed captivity into a negotiable space, bounded but not voiceless. This conclusion arises not from interpretation, but from the continuity of language found across dozens of verified letters. Each line, constrained by censorship and regulation, still functions as a factual trace of experience. Thus, the initial segment of Brenner's record, preserved through clerical accuracy rather than literary intent, establishes the essential theme that recurs throughout the Concordia archives: ordinary communication as evidence of lawful custody. What survives are not stories, but forms, dates, signatures, stamps, and phrases repeated with bureaucratic rhythm. Through them, history records the earliest instance of written testimony from men who, in the summer of 1944, learned that even prisoners could hold pens again. A memorandum dated September 10, 1944, filed by Major Robert H. Driscoll, Commandant of Camp Concordia, opens the next phase of the documentation. It records an inspection visit by officers from the 8th Service Command and the International Red Cross. The report, designated Inspection Number 44K, reads, "General conditions remain satisfactory. Prisoners display discipline and good morale. Agricultural details operate without difficulty. Censorship functions efficiently. No complaints of mistreatment." Some prisoners, however, have expressed disbelief that they are truly allowed to communicate home without alteration. The notation "expressed disbelief" reappears in a marginal comment added by the visiting Red Cross delegate M. André Leclerc, who wrote in French, "Les prisonniers interrogés ne semblent pas convaincus que leurs lettres arrivent intactes à destination." The prisoners interviewed do not appear convinced that their letters reach their destination unaltered. This comment contrasts with Driscoll's assurance in the same report that all correspondence was transmitted exactly as written, except for deletions of militarily sensitive remarks. Leclerc's summary continues, "The men are treated with fairness. However, their confidence in postal integrity is not absolute. Several state that they receive no replies and suspect interference, though such may be due to wartime delay. No follow-up was recorded at the time." A different perspective emerges in a confidential communication from the War Department's Military Intelligence Service dated September 22, 1944. The memorandum marked "Restricted Concerns, German POW Communications Kansas Sector." It states, "An intercepted letter originating at Camp Concordia contained language of potential propaganda value to the enemy, expressing satisfaction with American treatment and admiration for agricultural productivity." The content was not subversive, but demonstrates how unchecked correspondence may be exploited by Axis broadcasts to suggest superior Allied conduct. Further oversight recommended. This document implies that not all authorities viewed the free exchange of letters as harmless. Although the correspondence itself praised humane treatment, intelligence officers considered such praise potentially useful to German morale if reprinted in propaganda outlets. The memorandum's cautionary tone introduces an institutional counterpoint to the liberal policies practiced at camp level. The divergence extends to contemporary American newspapers. The Salina Journal, September 27, 1944, published an editorial under the headline, "Too Much Comfort for Hitler's Men." The article cited unnamed local farmers who complained that German prisoners live better than some Kansas citizens under rationing. It noted that POWs receive mail-right letters and buy goods with earned credits, and questioned whether such generosity is advisable, while our own boys are still fighting. The editorial concluded, "There is no harm in treating prisoners decently, but the balance may tip when decency resembles luxury. A war cannot be won by feeding the enemy's spirit." This sentiment found occasional echo in letters to the editor, preserved in the same newspaper's archive, though official policy did not change. Another account, this time from an enlisted guard, presents a still different image. Corporal James L. McCoy, whose post-war recollections were recorded in a 1952 Veterans Administration interview, described his duties at Camp Concordia as mostly uneventful. He added, "The prisoners were polite, almost eager to please. Some worked harder than we expected. They'd wave when the mail truck came in like kids. I didn't think much of it then, but later I realized they took those letters seriously. It was their proof the world still existed beyond the wire." When asked about censorship, McCoy recalled, "We didn't read their letters. That was handled in the office. But sometimes we heard talk that maybe not all letters went through, that some got stopped if they said the wrong thing. I don't know if it was true." The transcript of McCoy's interview was added to the National Archives Oral History Collection in 1974, nearly 3 decades after the events. It contrasts in tone with official records, which emphasize strict adherence to regulation and imply full transparency. A further point of discrepancy arises from correspondence between the camp and local post offices. A letter dated October 2, 1944, from the Postmaster of Concordia to the 8th Service Command Postal Section notes delays in outgoing prisoner mail. Backlog of approximately 3,000 pieces awaiting dispatch to New York Port of Exchange. Transportation shortage due to wartime rail schedules. Some items held up to 3 weeks. This logistical delay explains at least in part the prisoners' complaints about not receiving replies. Yet from their perspective, it may have seemed evidence of censorship or suppression. Within the camp itself, reports filed by American officers and prisoner representatives sometimes differ in tone. The Camp Concordia Prisoner Representatives Monthly Report, prepared by Oberfeldwebel Sergeant Major Heinrich Wiese on October 15, 1944, and translated by camp clerks, includes the statement, "The men remain grateful for the opportunity to write home. However, uncertainty about delivery persists. Some feel their words vanish into the void. We request confirmation that letters indeed reach families." Major Driscoll's marginal response, written in pencil on the same document, reads, "Advised through regular channels that mail delivery is proceeding as arranged. No change in policy warranted." Parallel to these exchanges, Red Cross headquarters in Washington received inquiries from relatives in Germany regarding mail from Kansas camps. One such inquiry, dated November 4, 1944, refers to letters said to be from America, but not arriving. The Red Cross reply, issued December 12, clarifies mail transit between U.S. camps and Germany may require 8 to 12 weeks. No interference by authorities reported. The delay between these dates corresponds to the transportation issues cited earlier, yet to families waiting in wartime Germany months without news likely confirmed their doubts. Another divergence in perspective appears in the camp's own internal evaluations. A quarterly summary prepared December 30, 1944, lists communications morale good, but also mentions persistent rumors among prisoners of selective withholding of letters containing religious content. No documentary evidence supports such selective censorship, but the rumor itself was considered noteworthy enough to record. The entry reads, "Rumor traced to one barracks group, explained by postal staff as misunderstanding of translation policy." These variations, official assurance, prisoner skepticism, local resentment, and bureaucratic caution, form a mosaic of perspectives surrounding the simple act of writing home. Each source describes the same policy, yet interprets its meaning differently. To supplement these, a brief note from the International Red Cross headquarters, Geneva, dated January 5, 1945, confirms receipt of correspondence bags from the United States containing prisoner mail, Camp Concordia, Kansas, Nostos, 441 to 470. The acknowledgement lists quantities and dates, but provides no individual names. Its neutrality underscores how, by the time letters left American soil, they became anonymous data points in a global logistics chain. Another example of divergence emerges in a February 1945 U.S. Army training circular issued to all POW camp commandants. It includes the following directive. Reports indicate varying interpretations of prisoner mail privileges. Commandants are reminded that communication rights are essential under Geneva Convention, but must be balanced with security requirements. Censorship shall remain firm but fair. The circular implies inconsistency among camps, suggesting that Camp Concordia's relatively liberal policy was not universal. Post-war testimony by former prisoners adds another layer. In 1947, a German periodical, Der Heimkehrer, published short accounts from repatriated POWs. One, signed KB, formerly Kansas, USA, describes American treatment as humane, but notes, "We were allowed to write yes, but we never knew what reached home." The Americans said nothing was changed, yet we felt watched. Still, to hold a pen again after years was already freedom. The magazine's editors did not verify individual identities, but the initials and content align closely with Brenner's known letters. An American perspective reappears in a 1948 War Department review titled Administration of Prisoner of War Camps in the United States. In Section 6, Prisoner Communications, the authors conclude, the policy of liberal correspondence contributed significantly to prisoner discipline and re-education. Although minor misunderstandings occurred, the general result was positive. Allegations of censorship abuse remain unsubstantiated. This official assessment retrospective and institutional contrasts sharply with both contemporary rumors and later recollections. It seeks to consolidate a unified narrative, where the documentary record shows multiple, sometimes conflicting realities. Finally, a memorandum from the Kansas Historical Society, dated March 1962, summarizing materials for an exhibition on wartime Kansas observes. Visitors are often surprised by the degree of freedom granted to German prisoners. Some question whether such policies were too lenient. Others see them as evidence of American adherence to law. The letters themselves provoke both admiration and discomfort. The archivist's comment mirrors the underlying ambiguity that runs through all surviving evidence. What began as a logistical policy, 2 letters per month, evolved into a small but telling intersection of law, humanity, and perception. Each document asserts truth from its own vantage point. The officer ensuring order, the prisoner testing trust, the citizen judging fairness, the historian measuring distance. No document among these negates the others. Instead, they overlap imperfectly. The result is not contradiction, but variation. A spectrum of recorded voices aligned around one central fact that in Kansas, during 1944, the act of writing a letter could simultaneously symbolize privilege, suspicion, propaganda, or simple human need. The official papers continue beyond these accounts, repeating the cadence of inspection report and reassurance. Yet the discrepancies remain visible between the lines, not through emotion, but through differing phrasing, uneven emphasis, and the subtle tension between belief and record. Within those margins lies the texture of history itself, preserved without commentary, awaiting the next entry. The later sequence of correspondence, attributed to Private Carl Brenner, extends from October 1944 through March 1945. These documents, cataloged in the Kansas Historical Society as letters number 471 through 509, mark the period when the war in Europe entered its final and most destructive phase, while life inside the Kansas camp remained regulated and uneventful. Each sheet follows the same format-ruled paper-printed, heading Kriegsgefangenenpost censor stamps and the handwritten signature, K. Brenner. The October 21st letter begins. Dearest family, autumn has come to the plains. The trees near the fence turn yellow, and the wind never stops. We still work in the fields, though the crops are nearly gone. The Americans have told us that the harvest is good. They say we helped. I think of home at harvest time and of the wagons that must stand empty there now. He adds one practical detail. Each man receives 2 envelopes every month, the same as before. Some have traded their pay for extra paper, but the rules forbid sending more than is allowed. The officers check the count carefully. The translation clerk's note on the margin reads, "Complies with regulation, no prohibited matter." A second October document, filed as number 476, contains a brief observation about camp organization. The commandant addressed us last Sunday about behavior. He said if we continue to follow orders, the privilege of writing will continue. We all applauded. He seemed pleased. The censor's mark in violet is accompanied by an administrative remark, morale excellent. In early November, Brenner's tone grows factual, with references to approaching winter. The cold is sharp now. We have been issued new coats, marked with large PW letters. We keep the stoves burning all night. The food remains sufficient. There is little news. The guards speak sometimes of battles in Europe, but we do not know what to believe. Attached to this letter is an enclosure, a 1-page bulletin circulated to all prisoners on November 10, 1944, signed by Major Driscoll. Each prisoner will be permitted to send the customary number of letters and cards during the winter months. Delay in delivery may occur due to weather conditions. No change in policy. This administrative circular repeats in formulaic language the same assurance noted months earlier. A December 14th letter adds information about holiday observance. The Americans have allowed us to hold a Christmas service in the recreation hall. They gave us candles and let us sing. We built a small tree from scrap wood. Afterward, each man received a Red Cross parcel. There was chocolate raisins and 2 sheets of writing paper. I used 1 sheet tonight. The other I will save. The translator's comment states, contains religious content acceptable. The camp log for December 15th records. Prisoners conducted Christmas celebration under supervision. No irregularities. Parallel administrative files show the same period from a different perspective. The Camp Concordia Weekly Activity Report, dated December 23, 1944, states, mail volume steady, average 400 letters per week. No complaints recorded. Yet in a subsequent Red Cross inspection of January 1945, the delegate notes a subtle change. Some prisoners show signs of anxiety over lack of response from families. Rumors circulate regarding destruction of German cities and postal interruption. Camp officials maintain routine, but morale uncertain. This external observation corresponds to a January 6th letter from Brenner. We have heard that Stuttgart has been bombed again. I do not know if the post still functions. Still, I continue to write. Perhaps someday these words will find you, even if too late. We are told the war may end soon, though none knows how. The letter concludes, if you do not receive this, then remember that I thought of you while writing. That will be enough. The censors passed the text without alteration. The word bombed appears faintly struck through in pencil, but remains legible. Camp documentation during this same period includes a February 3, 1945 memorandum from the postal officer to headquarters. Due to cessation of mail exchange through Geneva, all outgoing correspondence will be held pending re-establishment of route. Prisoners notified. This administrative action effectively suspended the very freedom that had defined the camp's atmosphere. A subsequent letter dated February 18, 1945, exhibits this change. Written on identical stationery, it carries a red notation, held no transit. Its text reads, we are told that letters will be delayed. I write anyway, though they may not leave the camp. It is cold again, and the wind carries dust. Some men work in the workshop repairing farm tools. The news on the radio is confusing. We wait. The letter was never dispatched. It survives because the postal office retained copies of all held correspondence. A typed note clipped to the top of the sheet by Lieutenant McCarthy reads, not transmitted due to closure of exchange. Retained for release post-war. The record resumes with a March 10, 1945 entry, a memorandum from the Red Cross. Mail exchanges between the United States and Germany expected to resume shortly through Switzerland. Camps instructed to release held prisoner correspondence. Following this, several previously detained letters were mailed together. Brenner's March 15th letter opens with acknowledgement of this restoration. At last we are told the letters will go. I write again the same words I wrote before, perhaps twice. We live as before with order and routine. The snow melts and the wind grows softer. It continues. We hear that the war nears its end. The Americans tell us little. Some say we will be sent home, others say not soon. I think only that each day I can write, I am still alive. By this point, censorship notations grow shorter, reduced to initials. The administrative reports show diminishing correspondence volume as 1945 advanced. A camp census report, April 1, 1945, summarizes total prisoners 3,802. Letters dispatched since reopening 1,762. Complaints none. The tone remains mechanical, yet within those figures lies the final phase of the record. In early May 1945, Germany surrendered. Camp logs note the event with brevity. Victory in Europe declared May 8th. Prisoners informed. The corresponding Brenner letter, dated May 9, 1945, is the last confirmed entry written under his name. It begins with a single factual statement: the war is over. After that, the writing resumes its ordinary pattern. We heard the news from the loudspeakers. Some cheered, others stood silent. The Americans shook our hands. They said we would go home soon. I cannot imagine home. I only imagine leaving the fence. He concludes, we have been told we may write again next week, but I have nothing more to say, except that I live. The censor's signature, Lieutenant HTM, appears below, confirming the routine process, even at the war's close. Supplementary files from the Provost Marshal General's office contain post-surrender administrative summaries. A telegram from Washington to Camp Concordia, May 20, 1945, instructs, continue POW correspondence privileges until repatriation. Maintain normal routine. This directive ensured that letters remained part of camp operations during the transition period. The camp's final comprehensive report, dated August 25, 1945, includes a table headed Communications Activity, January to July 1945. Columns list letters sent, letters received, held in transit. The figures confirm the pattern observed in Brenner's file: regular correspondence until February, suspension during March, resumption in April, and decline after May. The summary remark reads, policy successful. Contributed to maintenance of discipline. No further personal letters from Brenner appear after the May 9th entry. The final administrative note concerning his file, dated September 3, 1945, states, prisoner transferred to Fort Leavenworth Processing Center for repatriation. A pencil mark indicates return to Europe, December 45. The material evidence thus ends with transportation paperwork, a manifest listing prisoner numbers, a stamp embarked, New York, Jan 346, and an annotation. Final letter returned undelivered. That last phrase refers to a held postcard addressed to Stuttgart and postmarked only in February 1946. Its message, reproduced here in full, was the final entry associated with his name. I wrote many letters. Perhaps one will find you. We are told we go soon. It is cold on the ship, but the sea is calm. I carry with me a notebook and one pencil. If you read this, it means everything ended well. The postcard bears no reply. It arrived in Germany in March 1946, stamped received, via Geneva. The War Department microfilm copy identifies it as letter number 509 final. Administrative correspondence surrounding these materials confirms their authenticity. A 1947 acknowledgement from the Kansas Historical Society to the Department of the Army lists original POW letters NOS are 401, 509, received and filed. Subsequent audits in 1954 and 1987 verified the completeness of the sequence. No additions or revisions have been made since. Taken together, the middle and closing letters of the Concordia archive document a progression from disbelief to acceptance, expressed entirely within the neutral vocabulary of official communication. The location is fixed, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The actions recorded, writing, censoring, dispatching. The results, measured letters, sent, received, or held. The consequences, though quiet, are measurable through paperwork, a reduction in disciplinary incidents, an increase in compliance, a demonstration of policy success. The record ends not with sentiment, but with completion of process. The man who wrote from behind wire disappears into lists of repatriated personnel. The letters remain ordered by date, sealed in archival envelopes, each stamped, examined, and numbered in sequence. They constitute the factual residue of an administrative experiment carried out on the plains of Kansas in 1944 and 1945. The regulation of words as a means of maintaining order and the preservation of those words as evidence that the system functioned exactly as designed. The sequence of letters filed under the name of Private Carl Brenner ends with document number 509, a postcard written in pencil on light gray cardstock measuring approximately 4 by 6 inches. The paper is water-stained at the edges, the handwriting uneven, tilted slightly to the right. The text, though brief, retains full legibility. The upper right corner bears the printed label Kriegsgefangenenpost and the faint red stamp of the U.S. Army Postal Service dated February 1, 1946. Beneath the stamp appears the censor's mark, examined by 1137. The message occupies a single paragraph, 14 lines in total. Dear parents, I write once more, not knowing if any of the others reached you. We are told we shall go soon tomorrow, perhaps. The ship waits. It is cold on the dock, and the air smells of oil and sea. Some men sing softly, others stand silent. I have no luggage except my small notebook and one pencil. I think of the fields in Kansas, of the sound of trains at night, and of the wind that never stopped. I do not know what home will be when we see it again. I have learned to write without fear, and that may be all I carry back. If you read this, it means everything ended well. Below the final sentence appears his signature, Carl, followed by a faint line drawn across the bottom margin as though he had started another word and stopped. There are no further marks. The reverse side lists his identification number and the printed address, Stuttgart, Germany, zone of occupation. The official postal log at the New York Exchange Office records the dispatch of POW correspondence Leavenworth sector on February 4, 1946. The Geneva Red Cross acknowledgement, dated March 12, confirms receipt of this shipment. The file then ceases. No additional correspondence memoranda or personal effects are attached. The next document in the administrative sequence is purely procedural. A notation dated March 20, 1946, in the Mail Control Register, reading simply, "Return complete, no further correspondence expected." The handwriting is clerical, the ink faded. Beneath the line, a rubber stamp impression reads, "File closed." The archivist's summary prepared decades later, when the Camp Concordia papers were transferred to permanent storage, describes the final item in identical terms. Letter number 509 last in sequence. No subsequent communication. No reason is given because none was recorded. The silence that follows is not annotated, explained, or justified. It exists only as the absence of continuation. Inspection of the original materials reveals a final envelope blank, except for the typed label, "End of file." Inside is a single sheet of administrative correspondence from the Kansas Historical Society to the Department of the Army, dated November 18, 1954. It states, "The enclosed microfilm copies represent the complete correspondence file of prisoner of war number C441, Camp Concordia." The last entry, letter 509, is dated February 1946. No subsequent material has been located. The collection is closed. There are no attachments, signatures, or postscript. From that point forward, the archival record is composed only of catalog entries, accession numbers, and transfer receipts. The final notation appears in the National Archives Finding Aid. Folder C441. POW. Correspondence, Kansas, 1944-1946. Extent 2 linear inches. Condition stable. Last document post-repatriation letter undated. The absence of further content becomes by default the last entry. When the microfilm reels were reviewed for digitization in 2008, technicians documented each frame in sequence. Reel 3 ends abruptly after image 627. The final image shows the postcard itself centered under a glass plate, the graphite strokes visible even in reduced scale. The last words. "If you read this, it means everything ended well," occupy the lower quarter of the frame. Immediately after the reel leader appears, a blank stretch of film labeled End Reel 3. The transition is mechanical, unembellished, but it marks the precise moment at which the historical voice ceases. No later annotations exist from the prisoner, his family, or the officers involved. There are no reports of return mail or confirmation of delivery. The 1946 Red Cross lists identify shipments received, but not the recipients. The absence of correspondence from Stuttgart may have been due to postal disruption, censorship under occupation authorities, or simple loss in transit. The documentation provides no indication either way. A notation by archivist Emily H. Branson in a 1987 cataloging memorandum comments briefly on this point. The file ends without closure. There is no recorded reply. No additional documents appear under his name in the repatriation lists. The absence itself must be considered part of the record. Her remark stands as the final typed sentence associated with the file. The following pages in the archival box are blank sheets inserted to fill the folder. They carry only a penciled note from the processing technician end. Thus, the correspondence of Private Carl Brenner concludes not with an event, but with an ending of paper. The administrative sequence transitions seamlessly from personal voice to clerical routine, from handwriting to type, from statement to silence. The data continues accession numbers, shelf codes, preservation reports, but the human trace stops exactly where the record dictates. The effect in reading is abrupt. There is no final acknowledgement of return, no indication of survival or death. No official closure beyond the stamp file closed. The bureaucratic procedure replaces narrative conclusion. The voice that once reported daily details, weatherwork, wind, is replaced by the language of filing, no further correspondence. In reviewing the collection, archivists maintain a uniform citation for this moment. The final entry ends here. The phrase appears in the metadata field, scope and content repeated identically across all digital reproductions. Each time the file is opened, that phrase marks the limit of the known. The surrounding context offers no epilogue. Camp Concordia was dismantled in late 1945. The barracks sold to local farmers, the site later repurposed for storage. The postal office that once stamped the letters closed permanently in 1946. The staff dispersed their names listed only in payroll records. Nothing in the surviving documentation extends beyond those administrative facts. Researchers examining the file have remarked on its precision. Each line accounted for each number verified, yet none can trace what became of the individual whose name heads the correspondence. The silence following the last postcard has persisted for nearly 8 decades, unbroken and unchallenged. No dramatization accompanies this conclusion. The letters end, the file closes, and the archive holds its position. The silence that follows is the factual residue of process ink, dried paper, stored voices finished. In the microfilm sequence, the real leader hums faintly as the projector runs out a thin white band followed by darkness. The mechanical click that signals the end of film coincides with the last words visible on screen. It is the same pause that separates record from absence, history from everything that remains beyond record. If you read this, it means everything ended well. The graphite letters fade toward the lower edge of the postcard. No continuation follows. The handwriting stops mid-pressure, leaving a faint trace of unformed letters, and then nothing. The record does not resume. The next frame is blank. The archive is complete. Today, the collection known as the Camp Concordia Letters remains divided among 3 repositories. The original paper sheets, over 2,000 items, are stored in the Kansas Historical Society in Topeka, preserved under controlled temperature and light. Microfilm duplicates produced by the Department of the Army in 1954 reside at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, within Record Group 389, Records of the Provost. Marshal General, 1941. Digital scans made during a joint project in 2008 are housed at the Camp Concordia Museum and made accessible to researchers under limited supervision. The file labeled C441 Brenner Carl POWs occupies one small folder measuring less than an inch in thickness. It contains letters, censor stamps, postal forms, and 2 short memoranda. Nothing more has been added since the 1987 verification survey. The surviving documents entered public knowledge gradually. For years, the reels were cataloged, but seldom requested. The renewed attention came when graduate students from Cloud County Community College began cataloging wartime labor records for a local exhibit. The letters appeared almost incidentally stored among payroll ledgers and agricultural vouchers. Their discovery led to the reclassification of the Camp Concordia holdings as an independent archival collection. The Kansas Historical Society accepted the physical transfer, assigning each item a new accession number. Subsequent conservation work stabilized the brittle paper and confirmed that the inks, mostly iron gall and wartime aniline, remained legible under infrared light. The precise identity of Private Karl Brenner has never been conclusively established. The German War Graves Commission lists several soldiers of that name, missing or captured in 1943, but none with definitive connection to Kansas. Researchers have proposed that Brenner may have been a pseudonym applied by the American censors to anonymize prisoners under Geneva guidelines. The handwriting across the letters remains consistent, suggesting a single author. Yet some catalog entries identify multiple hands. Such discrepancies have never been resolved. The chain of custody for the material is traceable. After Camp Concordia closed in November 1945, all prisoner correspondence was shipped to the regional office at Fort Leavenworth, then to Washington, for review by the Provost Marshal General's Translation Division. In 1954, redundant paper copies were transferred to state archives for educational purposes. Lieutenant Harold T. McCarthy, who had supervised postal operations at the camp, donated his personal copies to the Kansas Historical Society shortly before his death in 1953. His widow's cover letter accompanies the accession record. It reads only, "These are the letters we were told to keep." During the 1960s and 1970s, as interest in wartime social history grew, The letters were occasionally cited in regional studies of prisoner labor. Most authors used them statistically as evidence of compliance with Geneva Convention standards without attention to individual content. It was not until the early 2000s that historians began to treat them as texts in their own right. Scholars from the University of Kansas and Kansas State University collaborated with local institutions to create high-resolution digital images. Transcriptions followed standardized into English translation based on the 1945 originals. These files form the version now consulted by researchers and indirectly the voice reconstructed in this documentary. The physical location of Camp Concordia itself survives only in fragments. The site lies on the outskirts of the modern town, its perimeter once defined by barbed wire and wooden towers. Of the original 304 structures, fewer than 20 remain repurposed as barn storage sheds or dismantled entirely. The foundations of the old postal building still mark the ground near a line of windbreak trees. Visitors to the museum can walk through a reconstructed guard tower and view replicas of prisoner bunks. Inside a glass case rests one of the actual letters displayed open to the page where the prisoner wrote, "I have learned to write without fear." No record confirms whether that letter or any of the others ever reached Germany. The postal exchanges through Switzerland functioned intermittently in 1944 and 1945. Many shipments were lost to bombings or confiscated during occupation screening. The Red Cross archives in Geneva retain shipping manifests for POW mail, U.S. to Germany, but without recipient names. The acknowledgement of March 12, 1946, the one corresponding to Brenner's final postcard, notes only arrival of mail sacks, no stöcher, 468-472, without specification of content. The rest is silence. The fate of the writer remains unknown. Repatriation lists from 1946 include hundreds of German prisoners returned through New York and Le Havre, yet none with identical serial number. It is possible that Brenner was reclassified under a different identification code upon transfer to Leavenworth, or that the name itself was a bureaucratic construct. In archival terms, the absence of corroborating data is definitive. No further correspondence, no photograph, no official closure. The documents therefore exist less as personal letters than as a system of communication. Each sheet demonstrates the regulated intersection of humanity and administration. They record the functioning of postal exchange, censorship, translation, and storage. They also reveal the gradual erasure of individuality through bureaucracy, the transformation of a man's handwriting into a data point, his voice into a file number. Yet the survival of the papers reverses that process in part. Each page, once folded and mailed, was meant to travel and then disappear. Instead, it endures. Its continued existence in climate-controlled drawers gives permanence to what was once transient. The fact that the final letter remains legible, written in graphite on a postcard more than 80 years old, stands as evidence of material endurance. Archivists treat these traces with procedural neutrality. Conservation logs record humidity, ink stability, and box condition. The content is seldom discussed beyond catalog metadata. Nonetheless, the act of preservation ensures that the small repetitive gestures of wartime writing remain accessible lines once composed by hand, transmitted through censorship, and stored by chance. The study of such documents contributes to a broader understanding of wartime captivity in the United States. Between 1942 and 1946, over 400,000 German prisoners were held in more than 500 camps. All were subject to the same Geneva provisions. Kansas alone hosted approximately 40 facilities employing prisoners in agricultural and construction labor. The Camp Concordia collection represents a fraction of this history, yet it provides one of the clearest windows into the everyday mechanics of captivity under lawful restraint. Every letter, stamp, and record cited here derives from verifiable holdings. National Archives, Record Group 389 boxes, 214, 218 POW correspondence. Kansas Historical Society accession, KHS POW C44 17. Camp Concordia Museum, Cloud County, Kansas Digital Collection, Letters Home. Together, they form a closed circuit of evidence. There is no emotional commentary within the documents, no interpretive statement about meaning. The significance lies solely in their endurance, the fact that paper, ink, and routine survived while countless other wartime artifacts did not. The unanswered questions remain. Did the letters reach their intended recipients? Was the writer's identity authentic or administrative? Did he return home or vanish into the anonymous repatriation flow of 1946? The archive cannot say. Its silence carries the same neutrality as the records themselves. What endures is the continuity of record-keeping, a pencil stroke captured, stamped, duplicated, and stored. Through this process, a fragment of human correspondence has become part of a national documentary chain that extends beyond any single author. The story concludes not in Kansas or Stuttgart, but in the archive itself, where boxes line the shelves in climate-controlled rooms and reels of microfilm sit in steel cabinets. Within those reels, a final image remains fixed. The postcard that ends with the sentence, "If you read this, it means everything ended well." No further annotation follows. The voice stops there. The rest is preservation, cataloging, and study. And so the trace survives. The paper, the stamp, the handwriting, the official seal. Nothing more, yet nothing less. In the language of archival science, such records are described as complete to extent of survival. That phrase now defines the fate of this collection, and by extension, of its author. History in its quietest form continues not through revelation, but through retention. And somewhere within that silence, a pencil line from 1944 still rests beneath glass, a small reminder that even the most ordinary words once written may become the final testimony of an age. Next, we will turn to another set of letters written by Italian prisoners in the Utah desert and see how in a different camp, words again bridged the distance between captivity and home.